Next few lessons are going to be about the CSS grid layout. And while Flexbox is designed for one-dimensional layout, the grid is designed for two-dimensional, so it allows you to line things up with rows and columns more in a grid-like fashion. So let's open up our editor, and we're going to use the same HTML that we did in the previous lessons, where we've got a basic web page structure. We've got within the container, we've got several different divs that we can select and make use of. So going into the editor, first we're going to select the container, and this is the one with 6 divs that are contained within it. Selecting display, putting a value of grid for the display property. Let's refresh. We don't see anything happening quite yet. Also for container, I'm going to select the divs that are immediately within the container object and apply a border to them so that we can see the elements and where they're located. So refresh. So now we can easily identify where the elements are located. There's also a display in inline grid. So the inline grid will allow us to display these items that are contained within the grid, and it resizes them to be the full width of the content that's contained within the elements themselves. And these are, again, the children of the parent element that has the grid property being applied. So we do need a grid template in order to get structure and design our grid output. The property that you need to apply to the grid itself is have a grid template that you want to use. And the grid template is what determines how many columns you're going to have within the grid or rows. And you can set it using the grid template dash, there's grid template columns and grid template rows. So we want to specify how many columns that we want to have in the grid. And right now we're just going to set 3 at auto, auto, auto. And now when we refresh, that essentially structures our grid as an inline grid. And if we go back to the grid format with the 3-column design, this is going to spread the columns all the way across. And this is all set within the parent container. We don't have to do anything quite yet within the main container. Let's also add in some values. So text, align, center. We'll add some padding. And we can set a width for those of 200 pixels. So now when we do set those widths, notice that the elements are still structured within the grid format, but they're limited to the width of the element. So when you are using grid, then typically we're not going to be using the width property for the elements, because that's going to limit the width of the elements and how they behave on the page, because we are using the grid and it's making a block level type container. So go ahead and try it out. Apply a grid and then also a display grid. And you can also try the inline grid to get comfortable with what the difference between the two is. And you can be ready to move on to the next lesson.